And so talk about Varian Associates as they were founded after the war. I think somebody's hitting a switch here somewhere. You've got a picture here of the Varian staff. Tell us a little bit about what you know of the startup of Varian. What kind of a company was it?
Yeah, well, weather matters. I think that after the war was over, these people couldn't wait to get back to the West Coast and Palo Alto area. So they came back, and the Varians had a vision of egalitarianism.
It was a
Hence the name
associates as opposed to a corporation.
Yeah, associates. Everybody was equal. There are all kinds of stories. Like, one idea was we need to build a building such that if we don't make it, it could be a school. And we need some land because there'll be periods we don't have any work to do, and we can grow vegetables and
raise chickens,
sustain ourselves, stuff like that. But they got started. They made incredible inventions. The company proceeded at a terrific pace. Nobody could keep up, and it all worked.
And they were working on improving Klystrons after the war for various applications then.
Yeah. Near the end, or maybe after the end of the war, Ed Ginson went to England for a technical exchange meeting. And while there, he saw a new klystron that produced 10 kilowatts, which enough for a radar. And it was not very big. You can hold it in your hand. And so he was stunned to see that, and caused him to think about klystrons in a different way. And he thought, well, if you can go 10 kilowatts, I think I can do a megawatt.
Should be able to.
Yeah, and he did.
Short order.
Yeah.
Other companies then followed Varian's lead, pushing that along?
Yeah, I don't understand the IP situation too well, but I think it was pretty much available. And everybody in the tube business realized this was the wave of the future and had an activity. But and most of them were first in the East Coast. That's where the tube companies were. Later there was some out here, but nobody could keep up.
So one of the characteristics of the klystron is a single frequency output,
right?
Not tunable. So tell us about how they then worked beyond that. Actually, well, I've got some traveling wave tubes here. Hang on.
We have.
Well, tell me about the invention of the traveling wave tube and being able to do variable frequency devices.
Okay, well, this is another interesting story. Another British guy who I think had some of the characteristics of the Varian, and he sort of thought like a microwave or an electron. He was an architect from Austria. He was put in some kind of a retention camp in the UK when the war started. And then somehow he got out and went to work in a laboratory and came up with arguably the most important device in the microwave tube field, the traveling wave tube. Unlike the klystron, which has two or more spaces for interaction, the traveling wave tube has one long space. So it turns out that that geometry, which I'm not going to try to describe, makes it possible to achieve very broad bandwidths, an octave or more, which is what you need to respond to enemy radars, because if they change the frequency, you've got to change your frequency.
You need agility there.
Yeah. And it made possible broadband communication, both terrestrial and satellite, which surely changed the world.
And similarly, if the enemy is putting out a radar frequency, you can tune to it and block it. So electronic countermeasures came out of that also.
Correct.
So the idea of having a spiral coil where you would put your high frequency field and tune it to the speed of the electron beam to speed it up was kind of the secret that he came up with.
Yeah.
Okay, so this gave them a tunable device, and so in the 1950s they started using these for ECMs. It was, as you say, it was very common, But you worked on traveling wave tubes yourself in your career. What did you start doing with those devices?
I did that when I moved up here from LA, working for Teledyne MEC, and everybody in the business in that era, in the tube business, had a traveling wave tube project. I mean, that was where it was all happening.
It was a great transmitter, but it oscillated. How did they solve that problem?
Loss.
By developing loss, the backward wave oscillator development.
The first traveling wave tubes that were experimented had broad bandwidth and gain and all that, but they were not stable. And interestingly, it was determined that you could apply a lot of loss in the center of this tube, and that would make it stable, but not really interfere with its gain or power output very much.
And this was developed similarly in France, and they discovered that accidentally that they were both working on it, the carcinitron tube? Or anything about
Not exactly. After Kaufner invented the traveling wave tube, he invented a device that had a similar structure, but was an oscillator rather than an amplifier, called the backward wave oscillator.
Yes, okay.
This was a big deal. There weren't very many ways you could make a stable source at these frequencies and tune it.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, there was an annual, I think IEEE sponsored conference annually, and at a conference, Kaufner described this invention. After his paper, a couple of guys who worked at a company in France called Thomson, or CSF, went to the leader of the conference and said, "We have invented the same thing in a different format," which they had. It ended up being called the carcinitron. Interestingly, even though this stuff was classified, the leader of the conference decided to call his counterpart in France and say, this is what's happened. We need technical sharing and openness. And they agreed and got approval from both governments to release this classified information the next day.
So they were able to talk about it at the conference, the
Yeah.
French team.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So what were some of the big applications that opened up for this? Transcontinental, military, things like that?
Well, I mean, a variety of every airplane and ship needs electronic countermeasures at this point, and broadband coast-to-coast communication, telephony, TV, etc.
I was going to think that television, that broadband television signal, will have a hard time getting
Right.
from hop to hop across the country without something like the traveling wave tube
Yeah.
that had the power and the bandwidth
Right.
to do that. They set up the distant early warning line up in North Canada, and that depended upon these tubes.
And those were klystrons.
Klystrons.
Yeah.
Okay, so the klystron ended up there.
Yep.
What ended up in satellites? That became a big market for microwave.
Traveling wave tubes.
Okay.
And that's still the amplifier of choice for today's communication satellite.